member who attended the AFP Icon Conference in Las Vegas. And part of this is they're giving back. In a couple of cases, they were, I guess in all 3 cases, they were scholarships, weren't they? Okay. All 3 of our speakers today received a scholarship to attend the conference as a benefit of their membership, you know. One of the nice benefits of the AFP membership in general is that the AFP conference and the LEAP conference are really discounted to AFP members. So I personally think this is one of the best training events that I've ever attended. Sadly, I think the Las Vegas conference, while it was great, was not the greatest. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were just kind of coming out of 2 really cruddy years, and they're getting their sea legs under them again. But that being said, if this wasn't the best year, it sure was a great one, right? It sure was a great year. So the learning opportunities are second to none. They're absolutely the best. So I'm excited to hear today from 3 of our participants. We're going to start with Jeremy Ritt, and this is the only one that has been taped. Otherwise, our speakers are going to be live. But Jeremy has a conflict with a required meeting he has to attend during this exact time of our meeting. The 4th Thursday of every month, he's got a meeting at this time. But he was kind enough to tape a presentation for us. So we're going to start with Jeremy. We'll take a little pause in between, perhaps discuss what Jeremy presented, see if we have any questions, and then we'll move on to our other 2 speakers. For those of you who may not be aware, Jeremy is a grants strategist with Grants Plus. Forgive me, I made notes about what I was going to speak on today and how I was going to introduce everyone, and then of course I left it. So I'm doing it from memory. But it was a terrific time. I'm speaking personally, casually here. There were about 15 of us who came from this chapter, and it was a tremendous opportunity to grow some friendships too. And I had a real good time getting to know Jeremy on this trip. So we'll turn it over to Jeremy now, and we will debrief in just a moment. I think he's going to speak for about 10 minutes.
Great Smoky chapter. My name is Jeremy Ritt, and my portion of today's training lessons from Icon 2022 will be all about that ice. Not that.
Oh.
Or that. Not that kind of ice either. Perhaps my favorite ice, but still not accurate. No, in this case, when I say ice, I'm talking about inspiration, connection, and education. Icon is a choose your own adventure type of conference. And I started off with a great session called Grant Professionals Have Ethical Dilemmas Too. And I'll touch on some of the details on that later, but the rest of my sessions on day 1 were all led by fundraising professionals who come from communities that historically and in many cases currently deal with the burdens of systemic racism. Now, from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, that was pretty incredible to me that 3 out of those 4 sessions were led by people from those communities. And from an inclusion standpoint, nothing topped session 2, which was called Challenges in Fundraising, Being Black and a Man in Fundraising. Now, when I was mapping out my schedule, I thought, this is oddly specific to my experience. I thought, am I going to be in a room by myself with the presenters? Nope. And this is just a portion of the room that chose to stick around for the photo op. These gentlemen were all at different stages of their careers, but all passionate about service and eager to prove their worthiness. And I felt like, from an emotional standpoint, it was a great recharge, and that session alone was worth the trip. In keeping with the inspiration theme, I moved from session to session throughout my first day, and I realized that 50% of the speakers identified or presented as women and had the shared experience of dealing with the patriarchy and gender-based oppression. The opening keynote was given by an African-American sprinter / entrepreneur named Allison Phoenix, who shared her inspirational fight to establish parental guarantees for mothers who were also athletes. The closing session was given by humanitarian Zainab Selby, who founded Women for Women and Daughters for Earth. And she talked about her near-death experience essentially caused by working too much and how it inspired her to restore balance between her health and the work she is so passionate about. And it was inspirational to me to see AFP not just talking, but walking the walk. And from a connection standpoint, that really falls into two categories for me, personal and professional. We'll start with personal. The sessions that I attended, as I said, Icon was a very choose your own adventure. And so I chose to attend that session about being Black and a man in fundraising. I chose to attend a session about community-centered fundraising. And also there was another session that I went to called Being a Black Fundraiser in a Mostly White Philanthropic Society. Now, these sessions also alerted to me, some resources that I can use, and I'll share some of those with you here. But there's some affinity groups, so that if there are folks who might be feeling isolated or alone, like I sometimes can be, there's a group, for men, there's Men of Color in Development called MOSID. For women, there's Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy. And it just, sort of reminded me or alerted me to the fact that, we're never alone, and there's people who look like you and have shared experiences like you that are doing some of the same work that you're doing. And you can reach out to those folks for support, much like we reach out to each other for support when we have our monthly get-togethers, whether they be at these trainings or our socials on the second Tuesdays. From a professional standpoint, I started off with a session called Grant Professionals Have Ethical Dilemmas Too. And many of you know that about this time last year, I put down my generalist hat and began to specialize in the grant seeking process, something that I've been active in for a decade now, but I've kind of been always a journalist, but now I'm focusing specifically on grant seeking. And I got the warm reminder during this session that it's important to join in the push to recognize other grant professionals as just that, grant professionals, not grant writers, not grant administrators. It helps when it becomes necessary for us to refer to the code of ethics that the Grant Professionals Association has, which is not very different from AFP's code of ethics. But it's a reminder that I'm also now part of the grant professionals community that has its own unique identity and pressures. That was good for me from a professional standpoint to have that connection to that community. From an education standpoint, there are lots of what I would sort of separate into two categories, which are findings and trends. And let's go over some of those. So in terms of findings, there's research that shows now that appeals that show a happy child after they've received services does better than appeals showing an unhappy child before it's received services. So I kind of call it happy child, healthy returns. People will spend more to keep a child happy than they will to make a child happy. In terms of trends, as you see on the screen here, over the next 25 years, $30 to $86 trillion will be transferred from one generation to the next. 70% of that is going to women, who will control 2/3 of all US wealth by 2040. It's kind of astronomical when you think about it. So ladies are definitely the future of fundraising. And then from continuing with the education, There was a bunch of random facts that I couldn't really put into one category, so I'm gonna sort of dump a lot of those here, but in some of those sessions that I was attending, and in keeping with our talk about diversity, even though European Americans or folks who identify as white only make up 60% of the US population, 87% of CEOs or executive directors are white, 83% of board chairs are white, 78% of board members are white, and AFP itself, 90% of the AFP membership is white. And all that is to say that inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility is a current focus at AFP for a reason. It knows that there's some more work to be done in that area. And then finally, from an education standpoint, I want to talk about, the debate, if you can call it that, between donor primacy versus community centricity and donor centricity. And when I say donor primacy, that was shared with me in the very last session that I attended. And that sort of centers the donor and says, you alone, oh great donor, made this happen, and we are lost without you. And we know that that's not necessarily the way that you want to go, and it creates that savior complex. Whereas community-centric fundraising puts all involved parties on even ground and highlights the community's resilience and willingness to improve. It keys on the community as a whole. And then donor centricity, which is not in conflict with community-centric fundraising, it highlights the donor's role as part of a team of folks increasing good and making positive change. We all know that, in making appeals or solicitations of donors, they like to see themselves as part of that equation, and that's just exactly what they are. They're not alone in making this happen. Their support, whether it be volunteering or in kind or cash or non-cash assets, help make that change happen, but they're not the sole cause of it. And so I'll end with some key takeaways. Fundraising as a profession has issues with diversity, and AFP is active. I'm happy to report that AFP is active in the search for solutions. Community binds us and will birth the answers that we seek to our questions and our never-ending quest to improve that inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And finally, Vegas is expensive, and that hotel was huge. There was a lot of walking done that weekend, not that weekend, those 3 days in May, and I am happy to be back here in my basement. So I want to thank Paul and the Holston Foundation for hosting and allowing me to participate via recorded video. I apologize to you all for not being able to be there in person virtually, but I'm very thankful to the chapter for making it possible for me to attend and experience the inspiration, the connection, and the education provided at AFP Icon 2022.
I think you could have picked a better way to kick off this conversation. I mean, he just gave a perfect overview of the event. And he's right, Vegas is ridiculously expensive.
We went to the pool on our last day after the classes ended, and we ordered pina coladas, and they were $26 a piece. Ouch.
That's why I'm rubber.
That really is expensive.
Seriously, I had this misguided view that Vegas was really cheap because they wanted to keep you there to gamble. Apparently, it's not the case.
You have
Not
to
to
be
mention the fact
gambling.
it's just brothers. I don't like that city at all. But that being said, we were there with a phenomenal group of people. And I'll make a pitch right now. If I need it later, I will again. AFP Icon 2023 is April 16th through the 20th, 16th through the 19th, and it is in New Orleans. I don't know how Knoxville Habitat is going to be able to, if we're gonna be able to afford to do it, but when I did our budget this year, I put it down to take our whole development team. Because I do believe so strongly that this is the best continuing education opportunity that exists. And there's so much power, as Jeremy alluded to, that comes from meeting your peers and having that kind of conversation. Is there anything in particular that jumped out at you from Jeremy's presentation that was worth repeating and thinking about?
I really wish someone would write me that check that the money is supposed to inherit. I really thought I was excited that women are gonna be the major donors.
Women are going to control 2/3 of the wealth in the 12 years, 22 years.
Be nice to women.
Yes.
Moral of that story
And
is.
include women in conversation. So if you're meeting with a donor who's a male donor, typical male donor, you know, include his wife in the conversation.
You know, I found a hard time doing that. I try to get, there's a video of some of our planned gift donors that we're putting together. And I don't know if it'll go on our website, because some of them are more private than others about their plans. But I can't get their wives to come. They don't want to be on video, I guess. But I think some of them feel like it's his thing and I help other
And that could
causes.
be a generational thing. If it is an older group
Yeah.
that you're working with, and it may, the value sets may change.
But I want them on there because I want other ladies to know that we want to talk to them. It doesn't matter, single, married, it doesn't matter.
I keep running into people that talk about our will. You can't have a couple's will. It's true. It's just the typical, everything I have to falls to him, everything I have to falls to her. They consider it our will. And, you know, statistics say, you know, women die earlier, you know, so having that relationship with those is important. One thing that, I'm just gonna put this out there, I didn't make the March meeting, which was community-centric fundraising versus donor-centric. I've been in this business over 25 years. We are taught as fundraisers to be donor-centric, whereas our programming, our leadership in the nonprofit obviously is community-centric. What are the needs of the community? Let's try to meet those needs. But to almost be successful, especially playing giving fundraiser. I mean, I have conversations all the time with donors and I'm like, what do you want to accomplish? So it's a bit counterintuitive. So I'm real curious about that whole subject. But anyway, that's kind of what's percolating now.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know I find myself doing that, or going and being like thanking a donor. I'll have program managers be like, can you put this on social media? Thank them, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, of course. And, you know, it's a lot of, we can't do it without you kind of thing. And, you know, maybe I'm curious of this subject too. Maybe there's a better way to approach it and make it more community.
any other thoughts? Okay. Well, I do hope you guys will calendar next year's conference. I hate to keep sounding like a broken record. It's the best friend in the world.
I plan on going next year. It's not the last week of classes.
Yeah. Is it a
So,
spring break though?
no, that doesn't matter. It's just I can't cancel the last week of classes to go to a conference, but no, I have funding to go to it anyway, so.
Can't get your PhD students to teach us that.
Actually, that week, my graduate assistant will teach my courses.
I think we had 11 folks from East Tennessee go to the conference, so our numbers are growing as far as the amount of local people that go, and that was really great to be there all together.
Well, maybe if we can also think of ways to pull our resources, carpool, you know, it's a 9-hour drive. I'm a New Orleans person. It's a 9-hour drive from Knoxville. However, Southwest Airlines has some very cheap direct flights from Nashville to New Orleans. So we could, in theory, carpool over to the Nashville airport and fly down for about $150. So there's some things to think about. We've got some time between now and then, and those are some things to think about as you have to sell your budget to.
If anyone did want to carpool, I can get a university vehicle at no cost.
Better.
So I can get one of the university vans or something.
And leave it parked at the airport for a couple of days.
Well, I mean, or even just drive to New Orleans, like
Oh,
if we
okay.
wanted,
Just to.
yeah, because I can charge it to the department. It doesn't matter who's in the car. So it doesn't come out of my budget. It'll come out of the college. I spend everyone else's money. No,
No.
no, I'm actually working on that for another trip. I want to take, when we go to Dallas in November, I'm trying to get the university jet to take us instead of booking airplane tickets at this close.
Good luck, keep that work out. Okay, we're gonna transition. I'm gonna turn it over to Brittany Peter-Dyers. Brittany is the development manager at Knoxville Habitat. And she is going to speak to us on, for some reason my email closed. Advancing advocacy and philanthropy, turning donors into powerful advocates.
I need it to be a barrier between you and me, you know. I was really excited to go to AFP Icon. I am an academic at heart. I have several degrees to show that I just really like doing that and learning and just hearing new ideas and finding out how we can use them in our sector. I was fortunate enough to be the recipient of the Chamberlain Scholarship, so thank you to AFP for sending me to Icon and allowing me to have this experience. It was super beneficial. Almost every single one of my sessions, I took something that I had never heard before. And whether that was from the speaker or from the Q&As afterwards, of people asking questions based off of their organizations and the experiences that they were having. So to that point, I do highly suggest going to AFP if it is possible. I chose, it's great that we started with Jeremy's because he gave a really nice overview of what Icon was. I kind of chose one specific session that really spoke to me. Everybody kind of has their philanthropy, the thing that really drives them. For me, that's systemic change. I think about it in everything that I do, and it's great to be at Habitat where I'm working on affordable housing. So I took this session called Advocacy and Philanthropy, turning donors into powerful advocates and raising more money too, because that's always kind of the point, right? We had some really great session speakers, a chief engagement officer from Prosperity Now, a philanthropy coach from 360 Philanthropy. Both of them were really fantastic, and it was a great session. Without further ado, this is what we're going to talk about today: visions, missions, and advocacy. Oh my, because if you put things in threes, you have to think of it that way. We're going to cover what is advocacy. We're going to talk about what nonprofits cannot do, what nonprofits can do. Kind of briefly talk about the difference between advocacy and lobbying. Then we're going to talk about why this matters and how it fits into our fundraising. A world where everyone has a decent place to live. So this is the Knoxville Habitat for Humanity vision. And like most organizations, this is a big, strong vision. That's big. Think about your own visions at your organizations. How big is it? So ask yourself, thinking of that vision, will your current day-to-day activities lead to making that vision a reality? If you continue doing what you're doing, is it eventually going to lead to seeing that vision come to fruition? Are you working towards that vision specifically? And if the answer is no, we have to ask ourselves, how do we fulfill our missions if we're not being led by our visions? If that is not the end goal for us, how do we need to make adjustments so that is what we're working towards? So they talked about how visions become reality when we advocate for equity and systemic change. And the way I thought about this and the questions I was asking myself, where are we truly fulfilling our missions if we're staying silent on the public policies that affect those missions and the communities and people that we serve? I took a course when I was at Carnegie Mellon several years ago during a lot of turmoil in Pittsburgh specifically. We were dealing with shootings and stabbings and a lot of racial upset. And we had a lot of talks about, as organizations, as nonprofits, whether that's a social organization, a cultural organization, or organization, do we have a voice in this? Do we have space to have a voice in this? Is there a place for us? I mean, is this acceptable to have an opinion? So it's something that's been talked about for quite a while. And personally, I think the answer is yes. I think that as organizations, we absolutely do have a place in this because equity and systemic change doesn't happen if cultures of oppression and marginalization are allowed to continue. And organizations ignoring those things allow for that to continue. So what is advocacy exactly? So advocacy can mean a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it's systems change. So that could be social justice, focusing on equity and inclusion, focusing on community or economic justice, or in my case, affordable housing. But either way, it's that relational fundraising with a people first mindset and not necessarily donation first mindset, the money first mindset. I talk a lot about this with my friends about the larger scale things are, you leading life that is profit first mindset or people and community first mindset. And one of the most important parts, and I think I get into this conversation more than I do anything else. Advocacy is policy and not politics. And there is a very, very stark difference between those two things. And it's important to remember this. Because participating in advocacy is not getting political. That's not what it is. It's all about policy. The IRS website does actually have a lot of information about what charities can and cannot do in terms of advocacy and lobbying. So there are resources out there, and the system is set up to where nonprofits can participate in this. So nonprofits cannot be political. So this is kind of what we're talking about not being political. You can't endorse candidates. Don't make, contributions to campaigns or ask candidates to sign pledges. You can't restrict use of facilities to specific candidates. You can't participate in partisan political activities, support specific parties, or obviously use federal grant funds on lobbying. So it's pretty clear things that you can't do. And some of these seem pretty, makes sense, right? It's easy, you don't want to choose a candidate because that would alienate a large portion of your donors or a large portion of your community. And it's not about the specific candidate when you're talking about advocacy. It's about the policies that are being put in place and affecting your communities and your work. Use too nice of paper. It's hard to turn. But nonprofits can advocate. They can advocate, and it is incredibly important to do so. And I get asked a lot about what that looks like because it can be easy to confuse political with policy. But as a nonprofit, you can work on and support ballot measures. You can educate candidates, create voter guides, issue scorecards. You can ask candidates questions. You can canvass. You can do voter registration drives.
You can endorse specific policies and bills, and this one's really important to take note because this is where, you know, interacting with your legislators or potential candidates is important. It's not about endorsing a candidate, but you are allowed to share how that candidate has voted in the past. And you're allowed to question them about it. And you are allowed to make it known that that is how they voted and this is what happened because that passed or didn't pass. And I always try to think of it, our organizations exist because there's a gap in policy. We do our work because the system isn't doing it. And if we ignore advocacy, we're ignoring why we exist in the first place. And I think that's doing ourselves a disservice, our donors a disservice, and the people that we serve. So lobbying, which is kind of a scary word. There's a lot of like negative connotation. It kind of makes you want to like cringe or shiver down, you know, your spine. It's not a great word. But all lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. So you don't necessarily have to do lobbying if you're participating in advocacy, but it is a great resource and it's not nearly as scary as you might think. So the difference between advocacy and lobbying. Advocacy means to speak up, plead the case of another, educate people about an issue, or fight for a cause. Lobbying is an attempt to influence specific legislation in any legislative body. So this could be a bill or a ballot measure. It could be at the city council level, or it could be at the Congress level. Any type of influence is going to be lobbying, and that covers a lot. Now the big question, why is this important and what does it have to do with donors? Because that's why we're here and that's what we care about. And, you know, we have to ask ourselves what motivates our donors? Does anyone, what motivates your donors? Any answers?
The chance to make improvement.
Chance to make an improvement. I love that. Thank you, Nancy. The thing that I was thinking about is impact. Impact motivates our donors. They want to know that they are making change, making an impact, whether that's in an individual person's life or at a larger scale. Philanthropy plus advocacy equals impact, which is how we got here. If we're not engaging and connecting our donors to the larger issues creating the need for our missions, I don't feel that we are fully engaging our donors in philanthropy and working towards our mission fulfillment. It's great that, it's funny, actually, that Jeremy mentioned about the trillions of dollars of wealth that is going to be transferring from one generation to the next. Generation X is now at their peak earning, and they're going to overtake the boomer population by 2028. And this Gen X have two factors that motivate them above all else: tax incentives and impact. So 24% of Gen X believe volunteering has the greatest impact. So this is kind of where we get into why advocacy can be so important. We have all of this wealth coming into a generation that cares about impact and very much thinks that volunteering is the best way to do that. So we can use that to our advantage because donors are the perfect advocates. They internalize your mission. They turn philanthropy from passive to active because they're participating in it. It gives them an outlet for their story and their why. They're not just sharing their why with you anymore. They can share it with their community, and that inspires others to give. It inspires others to care and participate and engage with you. They gave this really great case study that I wanted to share. So they talk about a donor, Courtney. She originally was invited by a corporate partner to a fundraising gala. You know those, a company buys a table of eight and bring people, and maybe they donate and maybe they continue to donate a little bit every single year because they're invited. So Courtney had been a donor for 2 years in the $500,000 range. She was 45 to 55 age range, so a Gen Xer. This organization decided to invite Courtney to volunteer with them first. So not just participate in the gala, but come volunteer with us. Let us get to know you a little bit better. After that, they invited her to a housing advocacy day at the state capitol. So they invited her to be part of the mission, not just donate her money or the day-to-day, but participate in a larger campaign that is creating the organization. And Courtney's giving increased 5 times that first year after participating in advocacy, 5 times. After the second year of being engaged as an advocate and not just a donor, her giving increased 10 times. That's a big number. And who wants to see their donors increase their giving by 10 times in 2 years? That's incredible. Those are big numbers. And that's the kind of retention and cultivation that we want to see in our donors. So we can ask ourselves, how do we do this? My lovely boss, Angie, loves to say that's why it's called development. Because it's about building a culture of philanthropy and not just asking people to hand over cash. It's not transactional, it's a culture. And this is exactly the same concept within that framework. So you build a culture of advocacy. You have to identify your challenges and fears. So in the same way with major giving, having that abundance mindset, identify what you're struggling with and overcoming those things. Getting your key stakeholders on board and creating a culture starts with a process. And it's all about the 8s, which I love this. Love it when it matches. So educate, communicate, donate, advocate. It's a cycle. And you'll notice that it fits very well into engage, which is the culture of philanthropy. We engage, we make the ask, we thank them, we report on what impact their gift made. And then we do it again. And advocacy is a great way to deepen that engagement. Your donors they want to engage with your organization and they want to work towards fulfilling that mission. And you're just giving them another avenue to do so. So how might this actually look? This is allowing them to internalize your brand and really getting to understand what you do and why you do it and becoming a part of it. It's connecting your donor to your work and your work to the larger issue. Why your organization exists. What gap is it filling? What gaps is it not filling? And then empower them to be part of the change. We talk a lot about giving donors power in donor conversations. This is the same idea, just at a deeper engagement level. And then you have to give them opportunities to connect with lawmakers, program recipients. They want to be a part of this and you have to give them opportunities to do so. And then finally, connecting their story to your story. Because if they are giving to your organization and they want to participate, there is a connection there. So some examples of how you can do this is inviting them to attend an advocacy day. You could ask them to write legislators, write op-eds, connect to donors with larger campaigns, make lawn signs available, have social media badges available, encourage them to host education parties, which we do front porch parties. And this is a very similar idea, but with an education mindset. There's a very wide spectrum of engagement here. So there is a space for everybody depending on how they like to engage and what they're comfortable doing. Some people want to be very public facing. Some people want to be behind the scenes. That's where I am. I would much prefer to write letters and volunteer and not necessarily be in front of people. I like to do the behind the scenes stuff. So there is an engagement activity for every type of donor. So there is a space for everybody here. All right, so that was a lot. I know. So we're going to kind of sum it up and go over the general ideas. It's about policies, not political parties or candidates, policy focused. It's about building processes. And so that's deciding what issues will you follow. Are they local? Are they state? Are they national? What decisions are you going to endorse? How are you going to make those decisions? Who's going to decide that we endorse, that we oppose, that we're going to stay neutral in these situations? And then how are you going to engage your community? And how are you going to commit organizational resources? With all things, having a process and looking at your policies is so important to success. Focus on educational activities around your issue. Education is a very powerful tool. You cannot make someone care about something, but you can give them the knowledge to get there on their own. Tie it to your mission, vision, and values, and then tell stories through a values frame. Their stories should support your story, and you will probably have to help your donors find that story. And then you can do this with your staff and also with your donors that are going to become advocates of having different versions of your stories prepared. Could be 30 seconds, having a 3-minute, having a 6-word. I always like to think about when I did arts at the Capitol, at the state Capitol, we were going about talking about, I think it was arts funding is originally what it was. And we were meeting with legislators about funding and ensuring that the NEA was going to stay funded. And we had some very formal meetings that were timed, and we knew what that was going to look like. And then one of mine was, well, the House got called to take a vote, and I was supposed to be meeting with this representative as he's coming out of his office. And he's like, why don't you just walk with me and we'll talk about it. So running down to the bottom at the state capitol, like he's trying to go take this vote, I'm trying to convince him that funding the NEA is a good idea. So having those things prepared so that when you're caught in those situations, you can handle them and still make a really compelling story. And advocacy. It's core to achieving our visions. It can have a really big impact on our mission, and it deepens our relationships to our donors. And it's going to help us raise more money, which is advocacy is a plan to get the right people to take the right action at the right time to achieve a shared goal. So it's not that complicated, right? Advocacy strategies are so similar to fundraising strategies. They really are, because it's all about working towards that shared goal. So these are things that you already know how to do. It's just looking at it in a different way. So cultivating engaged donors to fulfill the mission. And I will leave us with a very inspirational quote that they shared in the session that I really appreciated and really spoke to me. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. People can make a big impact. They just need the opportunity to do so. And sometimes they just need to be shown that they have the power to do so. So yes, your nonprofit can advocate, and it should advocate, and it should call on its donors to do so. And that's all about advocacy and philanthropy.
Well, thank you very much. I think you just provided us with
Meeting, we said, oh, we're meeting, but it's been a minute.
It's very
That's a
good.
great quote.
It's a very good call.
Question. Did they say anything about nonprofit executive directors running for public office?
That is not something I want to talk about. It's part of the, talking about medical issues and where people have a space, but I don't think that there's an issue with executive directors. In many cases, they're probably expert matters in the policies in the sectors that they work in. And politics, working in government isn't just for politicians. It works much better when there are various expert matters in the room. So having executive directors of nonprofits, having scientists, and having a more diverse group so that the representation in the government is more representative of who it serves.
Are you interested in money?
No, I've got a different opinion. When you're a community leader for your nonprofit, and you have exposure as community leader for whatever the organization is, and then you use that to get yourself into public office. Like we had a foundation director that spent 18 years as a state senator, but he had the Methodist vote because everybody knew him, you know, and that just, I don't know. You become more identified with bipartisan or non-bipartisan, partisan politics than the nonprofit which you're paying your mortgage with. So anyway, I had that experience that you had with Fred Thompson at the Capitol. It was fun because we were there at the rescue mission advocating some issues going on with Department of Labor related to the rescue mission kitchens and those types of things. And we were walking through the Capitol, and Fred Thompson got out of an elevator. And I just sidled up to him and I said, "Can I talk to you about rescue missions?" He said, "Walk with me." And we walked for, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a very surreal experience, getting to be in the like underground portion
Yeah.
of the Capitol as they like are actually going to the House to make that vote, and they're just like passing you through these like security and like doing all these things that you did not know existed.
Weird.
And all the lobbies.
That was like the adrenaline rush thing, you know.
I have
Does
loved,
anyone else feel that way?
I do, and I have loved advocacy days. I think it's been one of the most, it's been one of the most incredibly charged experiences of my life. And then I started getting very passionate about some issues and some politics, and I realized real quickly, I better shut my mouth and step away because I'm about to get into trouble, especially in the South. Why don't you go ahead and queue up and we'll get ready for yours. I really appreciate that though. Again, when she was talking, I realized I've got two donors in particular that we ought to be taking with us to Nashville or to Washington.
I listen to that. You did an excellent job. I think this is an area where a lot of nonprofit directors and boards get unnecessarily scared
Yes.
because they can advocate. You just laid out what is possible and what is not. There is a fine line, but it is allowed. And so there is this prevailing notion that, oh, we gotta stay away from that. It's like, no, if you're a subject matter expert, you just talk about the policy. You
That's
don't,
right.
you don't get into Republican, Democrat. You just talk to the people as people.
And whether or not you participate in it, it's gonna affect you.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially with us, we work in affordable housing, and right now Knoxville is in a housing crisis. The policy is super important to what we're doing. And it doesn't matter if we participate or not. It's gonna change how we fundraise, it's gonna change how we serve our communities. And so you might as well do it.
On your issue, on your
On your
issue.
issue.
Getting into other issues get you in trouble.
So we're going to turn it over to Lacey now, and she's going to take us home talking about a money mindset, understanding relationships with money and how it affects your fundraising.
Well, I was super excited to take this class because I get really jazzed for anything that has to do with the psychology around fundraising, because no matter the skills or the techniques that we learn, at the end of the day, we are people who have to go into rooms with donors and bring our own feelings and perspectives into that environment. We may bring that into how we write donor proposals, whether we're preparing a budget or trying to budget internally for an event or something like that, or just picking up the phone and calling a donor. How you feel about money and it's how it plays a role in how you talk to donors is so important to be aware of. And I like anything that kind of boosts our self-awareness so that we don't let those things become drivers in how we work on the day-to-day. So this class was led by Jenny Mitchell. She's a CFRE and she is a consultant. She actually has a certification to teach this particular money mindset class. But what I've also done is injected a few other things. I took another class at AFP Lead, which I attended in Indianapolis last fall, and I put a couple of nuggets from that in there. And then I just love this topic. I love talking about money. So I also listened to a bunch of podcasts and got way too many slides in this presentation. So we're going to start with the first 14 and see how that goes. So what is a money mindset? So your money mindset is your unique set of beliefs and attitudes about money. And it subconsciously drives decisions you make about saving, spending, and handling money. So how does that affect us as fundraisers? Let's think about that. First, I want to get a little intimate here, and I want a little bit of class participation because I want to ask you all, what is your earliest memory of money as a conversation in your home? So this is a safe space, and I encourage anybody who can think of that memory that pops up in their head. I'll tell you mine when you all give some volunteer yours. Anybody think of anything particular? Talking about money in your household growing up.
My parents were separated or getting separated when I was a kid, and money was definitely used as a point of contention and power, since my father made money and my mother didn't.
Who else?
My parents and my family had 4 generations at a local grocery store. And so, and when I was very young, they would bring the money home every night instead of have a safe. And so there was always like money in our house, but I also learned it wasn't ever ours. And I got to spend lots of time like separating the coins and the dollars, like, but it wasn't ours. It belonged to another part of our family, essentially.
Well,
Anybody else want to share?
I never saw. My dad is an engineer and we grew up on a farm and he kept a ledger. He paid us 10 cents an hour times our age. But he kept a ledger of everything we ever made. And I have that ledger, he gave us copies of it. So if we went to the store and I wanted something, he'd buy it and then he'd take it off the ledger.
Oh, you're so store.
Yes. So anyway, never saw it.
Does anybody else want to share any early memories around money?
Yeah, my mom used to drive me to school. She's a teacher. And I remember, one day when I was pretty young, maybe 8, she had to explain to me why we wouldn't be able to live as we had my entire life because my dad was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder and could not work anymore. So that was tough.
My conversation was always like, we can't afford it, but then it was kind of an oxymoron because my parents have spending problems and they would just keep buying everything. But anything I would want, oh, we can't afford that. And so it was always kind of weird.
I'm 1 of 4 and we couldn't afford it either, but, and then I think the thing my parents used to say, if you need it, and you're like, well, how do you justify needing, you've got food and shelter and a pair of clothes, something on your back, clothes that you, like, it's hard to justify anything else. So.
So can you all see how these mindsets that we had as a child, our relationship with money, our parents' relationship with money can affect us as it's something we wear with us every single time we walk into a room with a donor, because what we do for a living is we talk about money. So I just want you all to think about that. And as we have these conversations, I don't want anyone to feel like anything is right or wrong, or how you feel about money is bad or negative. These are just things that we should be aware of as individuals as we talk with donors so that we can make sure that we're not making decisions for our donors based on how we feel about money. And since you all were kind enough to share, I'm going to share a little bit about my childhood growing up and how we felt about money. So growing up, my dad passed away when I was 4 years old, leaving my mom with 3 kids to raise by herself. My mom has an autoimmune disease. She has MS, so she was not able to work because of this disability. So we lived off of the life insurance policy that my dad received from his work and very little else. And what I knew growing up, my mindset around money is that I knew better than to ask. So when we went to the store, I knew you don't ask for anything. It was a treat if we got a couple quarters for the claw machine out front. But think about how that better than to ask mentality when you think about what I do for a living. So I do think it's really important just to step back and think about these things. And again, there is no right or wrong, but it is something that we can call financial flashpoints. So that's what psychologists call it, or financial flashpoints. These are these moments that are in your head. They're like those memories that stick with you around money. And it can lead to 2 things. It can either lead to kind of echoing that same mindset around money, so you can continue that same mindset, but it also can lead to a pendulum shift So the first time I got my first job, I blew through all of that money. I didn't save a thing. I got my nails done. I went out and bought clothes. I knew I couldn't ask for things. So if I earned it, I could go out and spend it all. So it can be a pendulum. And as we get into the rest of this, I'll tell you what I am today, and it might make you laugh. But as a fundraiser, we're a conduit. We're a matchmaker between the donor and the impact. We kind of do this fundraising money tango, and we need to be aware of how we can help the donor make decisions and not make decisions for them because of how we feel. So I put together this little slide of how we think about money and budgets, and just a couple of examples that may come to mind for you. So do you have a scarcity mindset around budgeting? Do you sit there and hem and haw for 12 hours over whether you can afford this 30 cents extra for this tchotchke pen that you're buying? Or is it wasting the organization's time because you actually cost money? So, I mean, I've been guilty of this many times. When I started working special events at Habitat, I went to bargain hunt to buy our event decorations, which turned into a nightmare of me having to scrape off clearance stickers with Gooby Gone for hours and hours and hours because I was trying to save, 80 bucks. So think about how that affects your budgeting, how you set budgets for your program, for your development program. Think about it in a hiring aspect or asking for a raise. Can I even get this salary? Or can I even hire this person for this little money? Think about how it affects how you ask for a donation. Have you ever asked for a smaller donation because you were afraid of that big ask? What about your organization? Do they have an endowment fund that's just sitting there? How do you feel about that? How do others feel about that? You may think that's great. You may not. Your scarcity mindset affects how you work within your nonprofit and how you approach money conversations with donors. So when you become more aware of your money mindset, it can help you remove those blind spots about how you think about budgeting and asking for money. Another assumption that comes into play with money is around whether money is good or bad. We may have this pattern of belief that causes us to have negative associations with money. So we could think potentially, people with money, they're greedy. Or money corrupts. Or it might be there's virtue in living with less money. We see this come up a lot with nonprofits, whether that's salaries for employees or spending on, you got to spend money to make money attitude. A lot of people in nonprofits, boards, they don't believe that. They believe that, this is something virtuous that you're doing. You're making less money because you care about the cause or whatever the case may be. So these are all just things to think about. Again, there's no right and wrong, but I do want you to think about how that affects you and how you approach these conversations with donors. The interesting thing about the money is power and the money is evil idea is that the problem here psychologists find is that beliefs like this actually lead to lower net worth, lower income, and destructive money decisions. So they came up with these 8 money archetypes that kind of describe the different mentalities that folks might have around money. So as I go through these, I'd love for you just to think about yourself, maybe think about your partner, people that you work with, and how they might relate to some of these archetypes. So the first one is the ruler. This is the empire builder. I kind of think of this as like the traditional matriarch or patriarch of a family who really wants to empower the people within their empire with their money. So this might be the grandfather who takes care of all of his kids and all of his grandkids, and he's setting everybody up for success. You might be that for your family. The next one is the accumulator. This is the inner banker. They love to think about money. They feel safe with money in the account. That's who I am. I'm the accumulator. I love to talk and think about money. The next one is the alchemist. This is the visionary. They are the idealist. They have a love-hate relationship with money. So they see value in money, but more than anything, for them, they see that money can help them accomplish ideas that are important to them. Anybody seeing any of themselves in any of these yet? The next archetype is the celebrity. For our younger folks, this is like the TikTokers or the Instagrammers who want to display their wealth publicly. And again, there's no good or bad. Everybody thinks about money differently. This is the person that values having the designer brand bag, something that's an external expression of their money. They might align their self-worth with their net worth. The next one is the connector. This one thinks that relationships are the most important. So they see value in money through quality, trustworthy relationships. Their money helps them build relationships with people. They're like the perfect person who's great at word of mouth marketing or for your organization. The next one is the nurturer. They want to give to all the causes that they care about. They're easily hurt and they wish they had enough money to give to all causes that they could. They live really frugally because money isn't important to them and they want to share all their money with those causes. Think about your donors. Do you have any donors you're thinking about for these different types? The maverick is the first one in. So that's the rebel with a cause. They love to go out on a limb, try new things. They're the ones that you'll want to pitch a pilot project to. And then there's the romantic who values experiences over money. So this is the person who's going to spend that huge amount of money that one time because this, Elton John has come to town, he's never come to town again, kind of thing. They definitely value the experiences they can purchase with money over the money themselves. This could be the traveler, the foodie, people like that. So this next one just kind of outlines those, and I'll share these slides with you all. But I'm just curious, does anybody see themselves in any of these archetypes? Angela, what are you laughing at? Which one?
Oh, I'm called a headless. I'm the romantic for sure. I will spend money to go have an experience.
Absolutely.
Knock stuff off my bucket list. But I also have a little bit of that banker tendency in the fact that I love thinking about money and my retirement account.
And I think you can be a mix of these. You don't necessarily have to fall into just one category.
I would say I'm a connector / nurturer is where I fall.
So do you all see how it's important to not only think about how you might think about money, but how your donors might think about money? These are the things that those donor conversations can help you discover. So we'll go to the next one. Another thing to think about when it comes to with money are money anchors. So consider how you feel about certain amounts of money. What would you be willing to pay for something? Be careful those mindsets that you take into donor meetings. Like for a young fundraiser, asking for $1,000 could seem like a massive amount of money when that's how much they pay for their rent that month. So be careful about your money anchors and how they will affect your conversations. Watch for how you feel about money. An A/B test of giving forms actually showed that if you included the number 100 somewhere in the text body above your donation form, they got more $100 donations than the other forms, which got an average of $50 donation. So you can think about how different things anchor your thoughts on money. And then be aware of how you can help donors see themselves as wealthy donors, because they may have limiting beliefs themselves that make it seem like they can't give to your cause. Ways that you can help raise their sights are through multi-year pledges, so breaking down a gift into smaller amounts. You can reference someone like them who has given an amount of money similar to what you're asking of them. You can talk about cash flow versus assets, and you can understand the sophistication level of the donor and who handles their money. These are ways you can get to know donors better. One of the other classes that I took, they said, they went to a big group of potential donors and they said, have you ever gone hungry or not had somewhere to live because of a donation that you made? And of course, everyone said, no, of course I've never done that. So don't take in your issues into a donor meeting. And then think about, like I said, who your donor might be. So the donor who's the connector may be more passionate about hosting an intimate dinner conversation in their home with major donors than simply cutting a check, kind of like you mentioned with the advocacy and education dinners. The maverick is the person you go to with that new project. The ruler is the person who might benefit from including their family in a giving conversation, because to them, they share their wealth with their whole family. The accumulator is the one who needs to know the budget. You know, you're asking me for money for this, but I need to know how it's all going to be spent. So just to sum it up, to be a successful fundraiser, you must get clear about your personal relationship with money, leverage those money archetypes to better understand your donors, invest in a growth mindset for yourself, be mindful of those money anchors, and embrace your own success story. Believe it's possible. If you do feel a lot of scarcity, know that big money is possible and you can do it. So the next page is just some resources that they shared. I'll add to this. I've been listening to the Hidden Brain podcast, which is one of my favorites. They're doing a series now called Money 2.0, and they have a series of really great interviews on any podcasting app. Definitely encourage you all to check that out. And then the last slide is contact info for this particular presenter, Jenny Mitchell. Do we have about 5 more minutes, and I'll share just a couple more tidbits. I do want to add in a couple of additional slides here, and these relate to some of the things that Jeremy was talking about. They did Women Give 2021, which was through the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, and this is new research they have found about charitable giving as it relates to women. And it was actually the first time that they've ever done this study, which is a study they've replicated time and time again, and they included with this one same-sex couples for the first time and partnered non-married couples as well. So the key highlights from this were that married couples give more than single-headed households. That makes sense, right? When couples bargain for choices of where to give, most giving falls in the man's preference or in the preference of the more educated of the two. So something to keep in mind. 61.5% of couples make their giving decisions together. And when only one person in the couple makes the giving decisions, it is most usually the woman. So, individuals have thresholds of how much they're willing to give without talking to their partner. And look at this difference between men and women. Men would give $901 without talking to their partner, while women would only give $311 without talking to their partner. Next one. So when you're talking with couples, bring couples together and families together for these conversations. Don't exclude women from the conversation, because they really do make a huge decision in the giving. Ask questions like, how do you and your partner make giving decisions? Don't be afraid to ask them that, because they'll most likely tell you. I saw some questions from our consultants at the Gail Carey Group that I think are really great. When talking about money, what's your vision for your own philanthropy? Those are great questions. What do you want to do with your money that is meaningful to you? And where does our organization rank or fit among your charitable interests? It's surprising the things donors will tell you if you just ask. And then the last thing I just want to share is, if you do struggle with any confidence around money or scarcity around money, figure out what works for you to help you overcome those things. So you can figure out what your money mantra is. My money mantra is, I will control my money will not control me. So come up with your money mantra, whatever it is that makes you feel powerful. Maybe make a playlist or a fight song that you listen to when you're on that drive to the donor meeting that gets you really pumped up, and just figure out what makes you feel good and abundant around money, so that you can take that into your relationships with donors. So that's it.
That's great. You all relate to that about what's going on in your own personal situation, and you're trying to sit down and have a conversation with the donor. Oh, yeah.
I've actually never heard even talk about it, so I really appreciate that, Lacey.
Yeah.
That's,
Well, especially being in the South, you know, and it's so rude to talk about money, and it's awkward, and, you know, I mean, I think that's culture in general, but, yeah, when I was first starting, it was kind of hard to get over that hurdle, and now at this point, it's like, I know people want to give, but then going and making sure I don't stunt their I guess, what they're willing to give. Why I'm
Enthusiasm
proposing,
about
yeah.
it, because we're fantastic.
Mhm.
Y'all pay attention, did you say you're gonna send those slides out, those questions from the Del Perry group? I cannot begin to tell you how helpful those questions have been. And especially those, of what is your dream vision with your philanthropy? And there's a couple of others on there that it's,
Yeah, I think about, it's been really fascinating for me to watch Brittany come into the role of development manager at Habitat, because I tend to have a more scarcity mindset. I am the accumulator. Money is security to me. So the more you hold on to the money, the safer you are. And going into donor conversations, if that's how I think, imagine, the scarcity I have with donors. We have a program, an event program, that I thought $2,500 was like the max we could ask donors to give for that program. And she was like, oh, I asked 5,000. They don't bat an eye. And I'm like, oh, this is why I'm letting my own self get in the way. It's really easy to do that.
I will tell you too, y'all may relate to this, as a manager, I know what it is to feel that personal hesitancy. And I know what it is to be forced into something that I was incredibly uncomfortable with. And right or wrong, I took the position that it was better to let her find her safe place than it was for me to push it. So when Brittany walks in and says she can do it for 5, I was like, go for it, sister. Feel free to take 2,500 if that's what you need to do. It worked. But I do have to wonder if I would have probably hurt our situation if I forced you to go higher.
Yeah.
Because it was premature. I mean, it was.
Well, we do have different money mindsets. I'm definitely the alchemist where I have a very love-hate relationship with money. I have a lot of feelings about, I went to a school of public policy for my second master's degree, and it was very focused about how the nonprofit industry works in the larger economy. And so I have a lot of feelings about it and money in general. And I think that makes me very successful at corporate giving, because I don't see corporations as individuals, despite the fact that in law and policy, they're often treated as people. And so I have no problem with asking.
I think you have to be careful sometimes. I mean, I've known people, and they're very wealthy people who are very pissed off, and people come in with a certain amount. I mean, I think you have to feel them out a little bit, and they're very offended that someone just gave them this amount to give. But I think it was, I don't know what it was, but I think it was probably a lot.
And that's why those discovery conversations with donors are so important. Instead of just like, I'm gonna meet with this donor for the first time and I'm gonna ask for this much money at the end of this meeting, but really going in and saying, you know what? I don't even have to ask for money at this meeting. This meeting can be just about getting to know them better, so that when I go to that second meeting, A, they're more in love with us, and B, the donor has had the opportunity to tell me what's reasonable, so that I go in with an educated ask.
Well, and I love to tell the story too, when I was using Wealth Engine, that it cranked out a number, and the lady's range was $25,000 to $50,000. And at the time, that was one of the biggest gifts I'd ever asked for. And I went into the meeting and I drug the organizational CEO with me, and I had paperwork, because at 50,000, we require like a contract, because it's probably going to be a naming, and we had a specific thing in mind. This was before I was even in Tennessee, but went into that meeting, and this lady, 90-something years old, who we knew had oil interests and oil wells and things like that, had already decided to give us 100. And my paperwork had printed 50. So I learned, I'm gonna have a fill in the blank template for any such meeting in the future. And I quietly slid that paperwork, folded it out, stuck it in my pocket, and gave her the rest of the packet that was in there. Because I went in with a number and I was, half
We've
wrong.
got to be prepared to pivot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a
Because
good
just like
problem.
she said that she goes into a meeting, she doesn't have to ask on the first meeting. But there are times when you suddenly realize, holy smoke, they're ready to go. We gotta be ready.
Yeah.
So I would say, well, is this a good time to talk about your
That's right.
gift? And
Yeah,
it's amazing what we're coming up with.
If you've ever had a meeting with Jim Haslem, that's how it goes. He's like, I know you're here to ask for money. What do you need?
Hit me.
You had talked in your presentation at Icon, and I really liked it, that you were requesting permission to ask.
It's my favorite secret sauce.
Yeah.
I'm having a general conversation with the donor, we're talking about this and whatever. And you can tell the donor's interested, they love the energy or the vision that you're putting in front of them. And I have several times now said, well, would this be a good time to talk about how you may support the project? And that gives the donor a very comfortable way to say, no, not now. And nobody has to feel awkward about it. And as they know, I've had two specific memories that come to mind where the donor immediately went, no. And then that's, practice that pregnant pause, take a deep breath. This person was super excited 5 seconds ago. Take a breath, let him finish, let him finish. I gotta talk to somebody. Okay. I had talking about that, about going in with the paperwork, and the paperwork said this amount. I had a situation like that with the donor a couple of years ago in another organization. And my paperwork said $500,000. And I asked for $500,000. And she took a deep breath and she honestly looked frightened. And she said, I don't know if I could do that. I guess I better talk to my man. She's talking about her financial advisor, call her man.
You're in the right room when she says, I don't know if I can do that. You asked me for $500,000, I'll just tell you right up front. Ain't doing it. I don't know what you've been.
But I got scared when she did that because I was like, my paperwork says you can.
I think Lorraine and I are not the only folks in the room that deal with religious fundraising. But for us, or for me, what I've learned and learning is that money is whole. I mean, it really is whole. I mean, if you're in that mindset. And so having that kind of conversation about what do you want your money to do for you or to do for your causes when you pass. And we cage it a lot in legacy, what's your legacy you want to leave? Well, just to define it as what is it you want your money to do? And that's some stuff that I've been reading.
A different perspective on that. So I did some work with a diocese and more on like the prospect research side of it. And one of the most valuable things I ever found is when I'm thinking about like prospects and how to ask them for money and how much and things like that, I get together with a group of priests over some wine.
Wine can be holding.
To pick their brains on some of the people and stuff. And it would be very telling on if the priest was coming to the donor meeting with us or not.
People feel the need to be more generous.
Well, I think it's a guilt thing, depending on what the priest knows about them.
Oh.
I love movies. There's the movie Brooklyn, which is about an Irish immigrant, and in that movie, the priest has a parishioner pay for her college as part of his penance. If you all do have a couple more minutes, because we're going down this rabbit hole, I just have two more things I want to add. If you're talking to Muslim donors, they practice zakat, which is the purification of self and wealth. So during Ramadan can be a really great time to ask Muslim donors for money because they are practicing zakat at that time. And then for Jewish donors, you can often identify Jewish donors in your database because they give in multiples of 18. I'm not sure the significance, but the number 18 is very significant in Judaism, and that Jews are more likely to give to social services, which is just another little tidbit I learned at ICON. There were so many good classes.
That's so fascinating.
I had that experience with a Muslim physician one time, and I was thinking, oh, I know Ramadan just started. Is this a good time, or is this a holy season that I should not? And I had the opposite approach. I was thinking, yeah, they're probably giving to their mosque right now. Should I be asking for this hospital? And it turns out, I mean, he surprised me because I think it was in my first year or two there. And he wrote this big check, and I had never really talked to him. He called into his office, and I want to sponsor a room and I want to do this and that. He'd already decided and boom, $15,000. You know, that's one of
Just
those
don't
things you
take
didn't
them
really
to lunch.
ask, but because,
No, don't
Yeah.
drink Ramadan.
Yeah,
no.
don't take them to lunch.
yeah, right.
Okay, all right, we usually try to end at 1, we went over a little bit, but this was incredible, helpful information. Thank you both, thank you, Jeremy, for taking the time to do this. I think this should be a standing meeting every year.
It's supposed to be, I
It's supposed
thought,
to be,
I thought it was
yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, so, anyway, but thank y'all for coming. And